Nuzlocke are a great way to make Pokemon games more challenging and consequently more fun. However, there's a bit of a problem nowadays. Over the years, there's been optimization across the Nuzlocking community. While developing and implementing foolproof strategies is satisfying, they do have the potential to harm the replayability of some games depending on how comprehensive the strategies are. Trust me, I'm not fully against all of this. I think it's cool that some nerds have found creative ways to solve the puzzle that is a Nuzlocke. But combine practically foolproof optimization with a decent skill level, and some Nuzlocke might end up being nearly as predictable or easy as a vanilla playthrough. So, how do we fix this? There is no one-size-fits-all approach, but here are the best ideas I've had. Find the slog. While we all love Pokemon games, we have to admit, they aren't really a masterclass of game design sometimes. A lot, if not all, Pokemon games have some sort of slog. A part of the game that you find yourself wishing you could just skip. Have you ever watched a Nuzlocke on YouTube and noticed they cut out a significant chunk of the game? Chances are, those parts were the ones that were boring. Identify these sections, understand why they're boring, and implement a rule to make them fun. You'll probably realize that the most fun ways to approach these otherwise underwhelming stretches of gameplay come down to increasing their difficulty. For example, do you know that part of the Johto games where you have to fight a bunch of Team Rocket grunts, but for some reason all their Pokemon are wicked low leveled for that point? Most people would agree that part is a slog. During that part, try restricting your team to 2 Pokemon instead of the usual 6. That might shake up your sense of security. Maybe force yourself to use some unevolved or underleveled Pokemon that have been fermenting in your PC the whole run. What if you disallow yourself from returning to the Pokemon Center in between fights? Oftentimes, you'll have to jack up the difficulty of these parts so severely that your new restrictions would not be sustainable to maintain for your whole run. That's fine. If a temporary rule is what it takes to have fun, implement a temporary rule. However, depending on the kind of restrictions you choose, you might find yourself tweaking your planning for the whole run to accommodate these new challenges. That's ideal. What used to be a slog has changed into a unique hurdle that's having a ripple effect. Now you've jostled the entire playthrough, increasing both novelty and tension. At the end of the day, aren't novelty and tension the whole point of a Nuzlocke? Quick question. Have you ever considered having manners? Be courteous and let the opponent go first for a change. This one might be a bit excessive in terms of the difficulty spike it'll create, but hear me out. Using some form of cheating, you can give yourself the lagging tail item, at least in Gen 4 onward. In each battle, at least one of the Pokemon who participates in the fight must be equipped with it. If a Pokemon is holding the lagging tail, there are 2 consequences. Firstly, it will move last within its priority bracket. Pretty much this means the Pokemon will attack last unless it uses a priority move. Think Quick Attack, Aqua Jet, that sort of stuff. Secondly, it can't benefit from holding an item that actually has some sort of positive effect. Now, I'm aware of some niche scenarios in which the lagging tail might actually be advantageous to hold. That's the whole reason it's in the game after all. That said, it's useless at best and an active impediment at worst in the vast majority of situations. In fact, if you're forced to implement proper lagging tail strategies, you're probably already way outside the norm for a typical Nuzlocke, and that's what we're looking for. Aside from the intellectuals among us that could spin a lagging tail to their advantage, the rest of us would be goaded in an entirely new direction for team composition. You see, a lot of the less exciting parts of Nuzlocke are the parts where you can reliably outspeed and one-shot an opponent. It can feel pretty good if you put effort into setting up a scenario to outspeed and one-shot. Maybe you used a different Pokemon to drop your opponent's speed or defenses first. Maybe you used some overpowered baton pass setup that makes you feel invincible. But when it's as simple as sending out your lead Pokemon, attacking once, and repeating that with the next few trainers, it can feel bland. This lagging tail curse forces you to shift your focus away from fast, hard-hitting Pokemon to Pokemon that can consistently eat some hits and live to deal some damage. It will also make priority moves essentially a necessity wherever you can manage to get them. I think most people like to keep priority moves into the late game despite their low base power, simply because they're so good in a pinch. This setup, however, makes them totally indispensable. With these factors in mind, you might actually overhaul your team composition to revolve around bulky Pokemon and Pokemon with access to priority moves. This could easily disrupt some established metas, especially if you use more than one lagging tail, and make your Nuzlocking experience feel brand new. Gimmick runs. I'm not sure if there's another term for these that's already established in the Nuzlocke community, but you've probably heard of them. Monotype Nuzlocks, Nuzlocks with some form of randomization, hate locks. Essentially, the runs that can be boiled down to Nuzlocke but blank. These restrict or refresh your possible team composition in a way that forces you to stray from the beaten path that you either actively prefer or simply happen to fall into most of the time. I'm not going to spend much time discussing gimmick runs, but not because I dislike them. I think they're really neat, and I do some of them myself. That said, they're pretty self-explanatory, and they're relatively well known already. They can be a fun place to start shaking up your Nuzlocks, especially if the other approaches I've outlined seem a bit too intimidating or otherwise unappealing. Finding and fixing the slog, having some common courtesy with the lagging tail, and gimmick runs. Hopefully at least one of those can help you re-spark some excitement in your Nuzlocks if they've gotten a bit stale. Feel free to share your own ideas for spicing up a Nuzlocke in the comments. And thank you for watching.